Welcome everybody, good morning. My name is Tunguz and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to Office Hours. This is a program where we invite luminaries from the software world to share insights. They're one-on-one conversations with experts and they've been a huge success. We've gathered questions from the audience, more than 900 of you registered to join this event and we're thrilled with the outcome. We'll run this as a fireside chat for about 40 minutes. We'll intersperse questions as we go. And my name is Tunguz. I'm a general partner and founder at Theory Ventures. We're an early stage venture firm investing in software and infrastructure and blockchain. Spent about 14 years at Red before I founded this firm with 5 other amazing people. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Oliver Jay. He's a seasoned leader in enterprise software. We've known each other for about 10 years. And during that time, he has led operations at Dropbox, grew that business. He built their online sales engine. And he saw there firsthand how the PLG motion worked. He then went to Asana and became their CRO all the way through IPO. Oliver, through those 10 years that I've known you, you've had this remarkable career where you've seen 2 different world-class organizations both develop PLG motions and then expand into sales-led motions. And over the summer, you wrote this article about the PLG Trap. And so I wanted to talk to you a bit about that and learn, and we were just talking about this before we got on, product-led growth was really, when you were doing it, it was really early. It was still being developed. It was still sort of a twinkle in people's eye. And then within the last 5 years, everybody wanted a PLG strategy. And companies that were enterprise companies or mid-market companies all of a sudden decided that they would hire a product manager or growth marketing manager in order to do it. It turns out it's been much harder to do. So I'd love to cover all of that with you. Maybe we'll start at the beginning. So tell us about those journeys at Dropbox and Asana. How are they alike and how are they similar? Is the PLG motion one thing or is it different for each company?
Thanks. Well, first of all, Tom, great to hang out once again, and everyone on the show. I'm super thrilled to be here. PLG. I'd start with saying this. I think Dropbox, Asana, most PLG companies have a lot of similarities in terms of what motions people want to run. But it's also very different in that it really depends on your product category. It depends on what type. There's I think multiple ways. We'll get into this later. How do you actually get going on the PLG front? But one thing for sure I learned is building PLG companies is really hard, and scaling them is a whole other level. And so
Let's start. What was PLG like at Dropbox? Let's start there. How did it feel? And then we'll talk about Asana. What did it look like?
Yeah, so Dropbox is interesting because Dropbox PLG you actually start with the individual, right? And in many ways, what Dropbox was really interesting is because I felt like we were trying to build 2 businesses at the same time. We're trying to build an e-commerce business, right? Which is the individual business. Get people in, get them to be aware of the product, get them to onboard, get them to convert, get them to use more, and upgrade and retain. At the same time, we're trying to build the enterprise business, which is not as much about the user journey, but about the customer journey. And the customer journey in this case is an account, a company, right? And that's very, very, very different. And I think at Dropbox, that's what I realized was wow, unlike traditional enterprise companies where all you have to think about is the customer journey, get an SDR in, open the account, land it, expand, renew, you're good. PLG companies are really difficult to scale because, like Dropbox, you actually start on the user level. So you have this user journey, like an e-commerce business, and then somehow you have to also jump into a traditional customer journey, right? Enterprise customer journey, and that's what
that makes sense. I think about Dropbox. It's you're selling to an individual. Maybe it's a retail. Maybe that's what you mean by e-commerce. It's like a retail business in a certain sense. And then you have this other segment, which is, you want to take that and expand it to a business, which has a completely different buying and expansion process. User is going to expand in a very different way than a business and the workflow. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, what I meant by the e-commerce business is like when Dropbox started, I think it's more similar to Amazon than Salesforce, right? Like you're building a product, you're getting it out there, you're acquiring users online, you're not selling to them, you're not talking to them, and a lot of your monetization is around how you convert those users into loyal paying customers. That is completely has no
Yeah,
similarities to
exactly. Yeah,
how Salesforce would open an
that
account.
makes sense. And was it the same at Asana? Did you also have this feeling of it being an e-commerce business where it was all about conversion?
I think there are a lot of similarities. In this case, for Asana, it was instead of selling to like the one user, right? A lot of times you're selling to a small team. So I would say the atomic unit was a bit bigger, but still, you're selling 5 users, 10 users at a time to enterprises as big as like 10,000 employees and above.
Interesting.
It's a long, long
Got it.
journey.
And one of the things that you touched on in the article was at the beginning, and I think you called this the end user acquisition phase. You have 3 different stages of evolution, and this is the end user acquisition phase where it feels all about funnel optimization. And what do you have to do to be successful there? And then how big can you be in just that phase?
Interesting question. Okay, so what do you have to do? I think there are some very natural growth paths that almost everyone takes, right? First, generally speaking, you build a self-serve business, and that has legs on its own. As you grow your self-serve business, you start realizing there's an opportunity to build an inbound business because a lot of users come in, they have some questions, they are at their highest point of conversion and propensity. That's when you want to talk to them. The next step is I think now there's all these terms. We call that online sales. Yeah. We took that inspiration from Google, but now I think people call it, I've heard product-led sales. There's all these terms like PQL, PQA, PQABC. I don't know. There's like lots of PQXs, right? But the idea here is like, all right, you got a lot of people using your product now. Some of them may have touched some human being, right, along the way. Hey, let's like try to prioritize which ones seem to be using your product the most and most healthily and try to actually get them to upgrade, right? So I think this phase to me is what I call end user sales. Like you're just really trying to nurture and maximize the conversion of folks who find you generally through word of mouth, maybe some paid marketing, but it's an online business. Your question of how big can it be? I think depending on your product, it can actually be really, really big. It can be really, really big. And we'll talk about the PLG trap in a bit, but like you can become a really big company before you hit the PLG trap,
Yeah.
and then it hits you in the face. And for example, the other day I was thinking about, I think we all use Notion, right? But
Of course. I remember when they
days
came in and pitched the A.
Evernote, like, there's a scenario in this world where everybody's using Evernote for teams, right? Databases, whatever, and there is no Notion, right? Hundreds, like, I don't know how many hundreds, millions of active users. I mean, the fate of that company, they really, I think they were sold to some PE shop. Wasn't even a news, right? So what happened? But they got really, really big just doing end user sales, right? Or at least like they didn't. I don't think they even got into the whole PQL thing. They got really, really big just doing that, right? Obviously, Dropbox did a bit more than that, right? It's a public company now.
Yeah,
but really relied heavily on this.
It makes a lot of sense. And so during that initial phase, it's really about, my understanding is it's all about funnel optimization, both having as many top of the funnel, having a portfolio of different inbound techniques coming in, and then maximizing the yield through the funnel. Is that right? Like, is that the discipline that matters then, or is there more?
I would say you have 2 critical things you're trying to do. One is what you said, like there are many different tactics to generate awareness and get people to come to you to learn about the product, try the product, right? That is one big piece of investment. The other piece is You do all these like inbound sales, PQL stuff. What you're trying to do is you're trying to catch users, potential users at their highest potential moment of intent and convert them. That's what you're doing in this phase. You're driving top of funnel volume and then like finding increasingly smarter and smarter ways, a lot through growth.
Makes sense. Okay, and then you enter the next phase, right, which you call the IT customer expansion phase. What did that start to feel like inside of Asana? You started with these 5-person teams. Is that this 5-person teams phase, or is it something else?
I think by the time you get to this phase I'm talking about, you're beyond. You're starting to see not just sort of the virality amongst users,
Cross departments, across teams.
So now your product. That's right. Some ideally you get cross teams, but a lot of times that's not the case. A lot of PLG companies, I think you actually just really get. In fact, I think it's a pretty healthy situation where you really go deep in one vertical. Obviously, the DevOps category, that's obvious that you go really deep with developers. But in this phase, you are starting to really start building momentum in companies. And you're starting to get some really interesting case studies of how your product is being used. It's increasing. If it's a productivity tool, it's usually around some efficiency. If it's DevOps tool, then obviously it's usually increasing safety, throughput, right, whatnot. And what happens is eventually if you're successful and you're starting to get virality in companies, what will happen is you will have a few large companies that reach out to you, and they'll say, hey, like, 2 reasons. They're either like worried. They're like, hey, this is a security issue. This happened a lot at Dropbox, which was like, hi, I have this Dropbox problem which you've created. What are you gonna do for me about that? And I say, well, we're gonna charge you 4 times more. So it's either a security thing, or a lot of times, and this is what was different between my Asana experience and Dropbox experience. The mindset of the CIO had shifted a lot. At Dropbox, it was really around like, hey, I want to clamp down. I want to prevent bottoms-up usage of applications. Now, I think CIOs are like embracing. They're like, they know it's happening, but they just want to make sure it happens in a controlled manner. So they'll reach out to companies like Asana, like lots of PLG companies, and they'll say, look, we love your product, or we have users who love your product, and we want to make sure that they use it responsibly in terms of like customer data that gets out and whatnot. And so they'll say, hey, basically they'll say, okay, like if you build XYZ security features, then you will have a $100K deal, right? And right now they're probably spending $10K with you. So it's very tempting. It's very tempting in this phase to start building these features because, hey, the IT, those deals are already there. They're basically in pipeline. You didn't even
Got it. So this is where the tension starts to occur because you've built a phenomenal business on that individual or small teams, and now you have the leaders within these organizations start to see it. They want to control it, and so role-based access control, SOC 2 compliance, permissions, those kinds of things. Those are the features that allow you to go from $500K, $1,000 a year, $2,000 a year to 10, 15, 20, 50K, maybe even 75, 100 in some of these deals. Is that right? Millions.
Oh yeah.
Even in this stage, you can see $1 million deal.
Double-digit millions, definitely. I think rare, but yeah, you can absolutely. Depends on how viral your product is.
Got it. And so this is when the product roadmap starts to bifurcate, where those bigger companies are starting to stress the demands and saying, we need to build this, we need to build this, we need to build this, where the product and the engineering organization and the marketing organization have all been focused on that, building that funnel that we talked about at the beginning. What does that feel like within an org?
It's really hard. It's really hard to balance because it's very likely that the founders and the product teams and actually the whole company's like the vision of how users interact with the product is so much more grand than what that product is already, right? But that product has already gotten so much traction, and you know that you also need revenue. And this is like glaring green lights. Like, hi, there's money here. You just got to build it. And there's also broad understanding that today, at least, at Dropbox, I think we were kind of flying blind. The whole industry was. But now there's broad acceptance that, okay, you need to build data residency if you want to go international. You need to build permissions. Like, it's broadly accepted. And so the question is, when do you start? It's not like, should we build it? And so I think that tension has alleviated a lot in the last couple of years. But still, when we say these security features, it's not like a feature. Like, it is a all-consuming roadmap. It's not like an XYZ roadmap. It's like an alphabet roadmap. There's like, it just never ends. And it's big stuff. Like, figuring out data residency so your data users in Germany can log in and their data doesn't commingle with the US, but yet allow German users to collaborate with US users. Like, that is some hard stuff to build. So it takes a long time. And so, yes, so this is when I think a lot of companies start bifurcating. And so they're not bifurcating, but they start executing on the security roadmap, because it's a multi-year roadmap. Frankly, it's an eternal roadmap. But hey, let's get going now. Might as well, because we have to raise a Series C, and SAML alone will get us, probably, I don't know, X million dollars.
And do you feel, is there a cultural division that happens within the company of people who believe the first way is the best way, and then there's a group of people who believe in? Is it then the leadership's responsibility to determine how to navigate and bring those two factions, maybe too strong of a word, but two different belief systems together and weave them into something cohesive?
Interesting. I think there was much more tension around when. Basically, the question is, when do we start doing the security stuff, right, and unlocking these deals? I think in the last decade, there was a lot more tension because you have different opinions. Hey, right? It's a very, very viable opinion to say, you know what, we're going to pass on those deals for now. Let's just continue to build for the end user, and then build a bigger base, and then do that. In my advisory and coaching work now, I don't see that as much, and I think that's because of the function of the environment. Like, people know you need that cash coming in, and so that aligns the different opinions. Like, it's like, okay, we need the revenue in order to keep going, to even have a chance to execute.
That's interesting. Okay, so in a capital markets environment where it's flush and it's easy to raise capital, maybe we can be a bit more idealistic as a culture within a company. But when times are tough, everyone recognizes that revenue is an important objective, and maybe the most important objective to keep the company going. And so this division there's less of a tension today than there was, say, 5 years ago.
There is, yeah. My experience on Asana, and I give Dustin a lot of credit. Dustin always was extremely mission driven and had a very clear idea of what's the role of revenue. The role of revenue is like fuel to actually achieve our mission, and so therefore it's not like something you can just delay. We have to do it in parallel, right? I think now people are really, it's very obvious that is the case. Okay,
got it. So now you're in a stage in Asana and Dropbox where you're starting to receive some of these inbounds. The customers are asking for the security roadmap. You start to develop the security roadmap. It's a huge amount of time. It's a forever project. What other changes happen within the organization? Do you start to see a segmentation in the go-to-market teams, in the sales teams, the SDR teams, the customer support teams? Have you seen a segmentation within the EP, engineering, product, and design teams? Or is it still one organization at this point?
Generally speaking, I've seen it's still one organization. Usually, I think almost always, an entire new product pillar is spun up across EPD for let's call it the admin experience. And so I don't think that, you're really I think what happens is there's a lot more deliberation around what trade-offs. You have companies, you become a lot more sophisticated in coming up with how you make those decisions. On the business side, this is when companies really start scaling out their operations. and different companies do it different way. I mean, we can dig into org stuff later if you want to dig into it, but there's, I think, many ways that where you can set up your team, right? Expansion sales, inbound sales, product-led sales, you have still self-service, but things start getting complex. And this is also the stage where international starts making sense, because you're like PLG companies have this interesting dynamic where
That's right.
users come from all over the world from day one. And so as even though you're like just building out, you're just like just hiring enough inbound salespeople, and you're already using like Google Translate. I mean, this is before all these AI goodies came out, right? You're using like Google Translate to like close leads in Japan and Brazil. So you start building international operations.
And another thing that changes within an org as it grows through this PLG to sales-led motion is the pricing and the packaging. Which features belong in? Is it the $19 plan or the $50 plan or the Call Me plan? Is that when the organization, you were the leader here, so I imagine you had a lot to say with this. Is this the stage when that product marketing exercise and the pricing packaging evolves?
Yeah, I think so. At this stage, there's usually already two SKUs, right? Usually it's like a free one, a paid one, or a paid one and a better paid one. And yeah, the way you justify investing in all these security, capabilities is generally accepted that there is a higher price, willingness to pay for security. And so this is generally when people launch the enterprise SKU. The enterprise SKU, which is basically...
Yeah. And how much is that worth? Like, you have a team of N people, and you have a 10 of N people plus the admin console. Is that like a 2x, a 5x, a 10x ASP, roughly?
Well, this is a very interesting debate. I mean, this is like, hey, should you list your price on enterprise on your pricing page? It's hard. But I would answer it this way. It really is different by company, by customer. Some companies, right? So for like a security,
and so they're willing to pay more as a result.
More, and their willingness to pay is more. Yeah. And this is where I actually think PLG and the SaaS per seat model, I think breaks down, or like it does a disservice to PLG companies, because like at this stage you're really starting to sell enterprise value, and that's a function of what is your product producing for the company. And if your product is, like, I remember like at Asana, right? Like there will be companies that will say, yeah, I'm basically going from 5 launches to 6 launches a year, because now we're all using Asana. We're also, right? Our product cycle is a lot faster, right? Like if you ask a CEO,
a marginal launch per year, like it's a lot of money. Yeah,
right. I'd be like,
oh, for sure.
7 figures for sure. But like you're handicapped because like, okay, there's only, maybe it could be as small as like 50 people on the PM team using your product, and you're not gonna charge, if your entry SKU is $10, you're not gonna charge $300 per seat. That's a little too ridiculous.
That makes sense. So I mean, one of the pricing frameworks I have in my head is there's value-based pricing. I think about Twilio. It costs Twilio a certain amount of money to buy an SMS on a carrier network, and then they mark it up. Or like S3, in order to store a gig, they buy the hard disks, and it costs them a certain amount to buy the hard disks, and then they store it and they mark it up. That's cost-based pricing. And then there's this other pricing, which is value-based pricing, which is what we've been talking about. What is the value of a marginal launch for us? Say it's $1 million. Is what we're talking about here, like when you are a pure PLG retail business, you're kind of looking at a cost-based pricing where you're just trying to make the math work to make your business work. And then as you grow and you move up into the sales-led motion, then you shift into value-based pricing. Is that right? Or is it not quite so?
Well, I think my perspective is,
That's not enough.
I think that's not enough. So, right, like if you're a PLG company, you're selling to end users, you're selling $10 whatever per seat. That model makes a lot of sense, right? And I think, is it value? I mean, I think it's like usually the price is low enough where it's like it's a reasonable enough proxy that it's a form of individual value-based pricing, right? if Netflix is like $10 a month, like I'm not gonna pay that much more for something else. But then when you start moving into like company level, right? Like when you're having that security conversation or a CIO or company wide conversation, suddenly now you're on that company journey conversation,
Yeah.
and it ought to be value based. But here's the thing: you can't really sell value when what the value you're selling is securitizing the usage of your own product. That's really
With
hard.
the
That
buyer.
doesn't land very
Yeah.
well. It doesn't take you really far. Like people get it. Okay, all right. My users, some of my employees like your product. I care about security, so I'm gonna pay up for it. I think that, but this is to me, this is why PLG companies get trapped, because their enterprise story ends there, right? And where your enterprise story should be is you need to provide value to someone, a persona on the C level, right? That actually is much more tied to revenue, costs, risk mitigation, right? Employee experience and retention. That's the stuff that's when I'm talking about enterprise scale value.
Makes sense.
And then security just comes with it, right? And if you have that, then you have a very different kind of conversation.
Makes sense.
Then you
Okay,
can
so
actually have value.
if I restate what you just said, you start with a PLG motion. It's effectively an e-commerce business. People pull you up market. You develop a security roadmap. The mistake is to sell security on top as a premium product. What you really want to get to is that's an important part of it, but what you're really selling is the value of this product to an enterprise is multiples higher than to an individual because of what they can accomplish with it. So there's a change in the product and there's a change in pitch. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And I think this is where I see most PLG companies get trapped because they've invested all their energies into building security roadmaps and XYZ. And the reality is the value of the product really accrues to like the end users, some like really small teams. It could be many small teams, but it's still a bunch of small teams.
Right.
The C-level folks, they're not using the product. They don't get it. They don't really get it. And so it's really hard. And so how do you go outbound in those kinds of situations? But if you wait until, and we can talk about like when do you know you're in the, you're trapped or not, right? But if you wait too long, and then you realize, oh, okay, yeah, CEOs don't really care about my product. What should we do? What else should we build? What should we buy? It's too late because it takes it takes a long time to build a security roadmap. It takes an even longer time, I think, to start thinking about, all right, how do I build or augment my product strategy to actually solve enterprise wide.
Okay, so let's talk about like how do you identify? So we just learned about the trap just very briefly, but how do you know when is the right time to start avoiding the trap? What are the signals?
Signals are hard because here's the thing, like you
Okay.
I think of it differently today. What I've learned is I think the minute you start going down the, hey, we got to start building executing on the security roadmap, is the day you also need to start investing, at least putting energy behind a plan for building enterprise scale value.
Yeah.
And this is different for every company. If you're like a Mongo, if you're like a Datadog, right, company, then like that's actually very easy. You don't have to do that because okay, a bunch of DevOps folks like your product, talk to the VPN, CIO, CTO, you're rolled out, you're good, right? But for many companies, you might actually have to build a new product. You might need to buy a product. You might need to build you might need to build a very templated, like highly opinionated version of your product for a specific vertical, right? And so I think of it as like, if you're waiting for indicators, it's probably already too late. Just like if you're starting to build security stuff, you gotta build a plan. Now, if I had to pick some early indications, right, I would say, number one, there becomes a point in time where you look at the growth in your pipeline, right, and you're looking at, okay, of my larger deal pipeline, let's call it 100K. For my 100K deal pipeline, the growth of those number of deals in your pipeline starts lagging the growth of your sales capacity. That crossover point to me is like.
So you have so many big deals that you don't have the AEs to cover them. That's what you're saying. Oh.
Oh no, the opposite, which is like you are growing
Oh, the
capacity
other way.
faster
So the
than
productivity of the AEs is starting to dip because you've overhired for the inbound
Yes.
demand, for the demand.
Right. Because what likely is happening is you've overhired, and so you're running out of opportunities where you already have a lot of existing usage, where you can run the security play
I see.
and get that expansion deal. Right? You've saturated your own base already, and for you to actually get your next set of big deals, you need a different motion. Probably an outbound motion. What do you need for an outbound motion? You need value sales. What do you need value sales?
Yeah.
You need to solve enterprise painkillers.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, and then for a lot of startups today, they're getting SOC 2 right out of the gate because now buyers are so familiar with buying software. They need those security tools. They want some basic level of auditing. The procurement team knows. So this could mean that even at the seed or at the A stage, you're already starting to think ahead. If you're a founder, you're already starting to think ahead about what is that enterprise value story in combination with the PLG story.
Yeah, like if I were in your shoes and I'm evaluating Series A companies, that's what I would be looking for. It's like, all right, you got great product usage, everything's great, people love you, NPS is super strong.
Yeah.
What's the enterprise problem that you're actually solving over time? Over time, right? You have time to get there. Expansion, sales, PQLP, inbound sales, self-serve, that buys you time to get there, right? But you need a strategy.
And so Asana,
coming to play?
I mean, that value-based selling for Asana, it must have been different for each company, right? Like one company, it's about faster product launches. Another, it's about driving efficiency. But was there a consistent sort of overarching theme to all of this? Or is it really solution selling by vertical, by use case?
I think like most enterprise sales, like you need to go kind of bottoms up and top down. So bottoms up was absolutely like, let's go in and let's figure out which are the use cases that we feel like have drive significant value, right? We kind of like build it. You're building the case that gives you the right, that gives you the passport to speak with executives. But the conversation with executives is not, I mean, that's not on their mind. Executives want to drive revenue, or save costs, or like retain employees. That's what they care about. So our messaging is very, very different. Our messaging is much more around, hey, how do you help you reach those goals, right? As a leader, what you care about. The one of your biggest drivers is providing clarity for your organization, and because clarity is what helps people move fast, and that's what really drives the product launches and all that stuff, right? And so with Asana, right, yeah, we actually help people get the job done, but there were all these like premium features that we had. Like for example, you could even we had an OKR product.
Oh, I see.
So you can set goals and OKRs from the top. Everyone else is working. Hey, we can automate the reporting on like how people are tracking to those goals. I'm not having that OKR conversation with like a marketing ops person who loves to use a product for
that makes a lot of sense.
product marketing.
Okay, and then so that's the pitch to the buyer. How do you, as a revenue leader inside of one of these companies, how does it work internally? Like, how do you marry the two strategies, the sales-led growth strategy and the product-led growth strategy together? Is one an extension of the other? Like you said, like the bottoms up plus the top down. Is that the way that you think about it in your mind, or do you have another framework? Okay.
Yes. Let me first start with what not to do. And then, all right, if you're the revenue leader, do not just go ask your product for a laundry list of security stuff.
All the time.
Which is actually what I see all the time.
Yeah.
Because that's what your customers are asking for. I get it. Right, but if you're the VP of sales, or if you're the CRO, like you gotta hold yourself to a higher standard. Like your job is to figure out what the company really needs, and what you need is an enterprise painkiller. All right, and so that's the first thing I'd say is like don't just pass on whatever your customer is asking for. Really take the opportunity and actually come up with some hypotheses based on your conversations, right? On where the company's product strategy can extend to actually have an enterprise scale, solve enterprise scale pain points. I think for a lot of companies, it will end up being a top-down and bottoms-up thing, meaning the executives buy a product top-down that is that frankly, I think should be probably standalone, right? If we talked about value sales earlier, probably not a per seat kind of opportunity, right? It can be, but really you're solving something for executives, you're solving something for everybody else, but ideally the products actually talk, right? I think the Asana example, where you're setting OKRs from the top, people are actually working with Asana from the bottom, that's a pretty good example. I think about the company that does really, really well is Atlassian, right? Jira developers are using it, they love it, but then what do they sell top down is Confluent, right? And like for a while, now I'm not sure, but for a while Confluent was like the intranet. It's like the internal comms platform. That's you sell top down, which married with Jira. Now, I don't know many companies that bought
I don't know
Confluent
anyone who has. Right.
just on their own. Right? So not Confluent, Confluence. Yeah. Lots of people bought Confluent top down.
That's interesting. So I never heard it described this way. So the developer product which is Jira's tracking issues. What are the problems inside of the software? So bottoms up, and then the second product, and this is different, right? Because it's the second product that's sold top down, and then they work together. They're integrated. But in Asana, you didn't. Well, I guess you had a different feature set, right? There was the core task management on a day-to-day basis for what are my to-dos, and then what we just talked about was the OKR, and that's what's sold to management. So it's the same product but different feature set. And in the Atlassian case, it's actually two different product lines.
Yes, exactly. So I would say at Asana, we would highlight different features to different personas. I think Atlassian had a more efficient way, which was they had different products. And so
if you were starting an hypothetical software company today, do you think you would have multiple products as a way of, because it gives you more degrees of freedom in order to position?
I think I would. I think even though it might slow me down in the beginning, I would certainly build the infrastructure in a way that gives me that option in the future. Whether your data model decisions, your payment decisions, like all those things, I would think about it so you can have that option in the future. And for example, if you have the option in the future, then this is where M&A can come in, right? You're already gaining good traction, right? Solving XYZ use case bottoms up. There's an adjacent use case for executives that could wrap it all up. You don't have to build it, you can buy it, but now you can integrate it because you've built your infrastructure in a way that you can absorb it.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, you would buy it and you have to like rebuild the entire infrastructure just to like merge it or integrate it. And then why would you ever buy a company to do that?
Okay. That's fascinating. Okay, and then if you're sort of beyond, if you're in the trap, you're now at this point where, and many companies, I think, in the last year have faced this situation for one reason or another. They've gone through reductions in force. They've had layoffs. The total amount of pipeline relative to the quota on the street is too small. And now they're debating strategically with a finite amount of cash, what should they do? And is it recoverable at this stage? I mean, do you think, and I know it's hard to answer in the abstract because each company is in a different place, but do you think on the whole, like if you've been a sales-led company, you started at a PLG motion, do you continue moving in that direction because you're sort of pot committed? Or do you go back to sales-led? Do you have to take a big step back and rethink the product with the value proposition? How have you seen companies navigate this? And I know it's a hard question.
Okay, I would actually split it, right? So, because I think sales-led companies adding product-led, going back to sales is a very different scenario than product-led companies that kind of like found themselves trapped, and they didn't sort of like, the sales-led piece is stalling out. I think so for that situation, you're a PLG company, you started that way, you added sales, you're starting to get some big expansions, but you ran out of install base to upgrade, right? Yeah, this is hard. I think at this stage, to be frank, like given the funding environment and such, like you have to make you got one big bet. And if I were this on that team, like yes, speaking in abstract here, I think it's very hard to suddenly go and be like, okay, let me figure out what's the top down play. That's going to take too long. I don't think that will work. What I would do is I would think about, hey, is there a
Oh, interesting. Okay.
vertical play?
Why is that?
Is there an opportunity? Is there an opportunity to like go real like invest really deep with one vertical? Vertical in my mind right now, I'm thinking more like a functional vertical, but I think it could also be industry vertical. But the idea here is like you are going now to like really, really take over core mission critical workflows for that one VP now. That one VP or directors under them. And it likely requires not as much investment as like building something new to go top down, but at least you're probably building more features. You're probably locking down your product more to give less flexibility, right? But if you're able to take over more mission critical workflows, willingness to pay is higher, and you eventually
Makes
should
sense.
get a VP to advocate for your product. You buy yourself some time, raise some money.
Yeah.
you can
So
get-
basically, what you're saying is
go back to
narrow
the-
the scope, get to a product market fit on a much smaller market, crush it, and then expand back out, as opposed to trying to continue the broad horizontal motion, which having middling success or is financially challenged or whatever challenge is in front of the company. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, look, it's the last part of like then going back broad is purely hypothetical. I think in practice, what will end up happening is
That's right.
like
Yeah.
you end up being a vertical specific company, which I'm sure a lot of founders would not want that because that's not part of their vision. But for
In
survival
reality,
purposes,
yeah, that
that
makes a
might
ton
be
of
an
sense.
option.
That's awesome. Okay, if founders and leaders want to learn more about these sorts of topics, aside from this incredible podcast, the content you've put out there, have you found any other great resources on PLG, or is this still sort of a word of mouth apprenticeship discipline?
I think PLG is still very early. It's still very early. There's some. I mean, I think there's probably less than
Who have
15
done it?
public companies, right? Started with a PLG model. I don't. Maybe not even 10, but probably 15. So, I think it's still early. My hope is
Yeah.
we can look at the lessons learned from the early ones, and I'm excited to see what.
I
the
love
next
that
class
view.
of
I
founders
mean,
do.
I think you're right, and we would be remiss in a startup and venture, a venture capital conversation not to talk a little bit about LLMs and AI and the potential for the efficiencies there. Have you seen? Are you excited about the impacts for AI? Do you think in sales and PLG, is that something that's come across your desk recently, where you're thinking about how sales teams will restructure or what parts of the stack could be automated, or is it still, aside from Gong and call recording and automated outreaches and cadences, it's not really, it's still state of the art, it's not actually in the business yet?
Okay, let me
Okay, awesome.
connect AI with our PLG conversation actually, I can riff on the
Yeah.
random AI topic because, I mean, come on, we gotta do that. It's 2023.
Okay.
Back to your question about getting out of the PLG trap. I think, hypothetically, the promise of what these LLMs can enable can actually help companies really like traverse that, solving for enterprise pain point problems. Because there's so many workflows in companies. Like if you're in the business of selling workflows, which I was at Asana, you go into companies and you are just amazed. Some of the most amazing products, some of the most amazing cars that people drive, like at some point in the innovation
Yeah.
cycle, there's like a paper and pen, documentation. There's so many workflows that can be automated, and drives significant enterprise value, but would not be possible in a world without these large language models. So I think the opportunity is there, but I see what most companies are doing, and I think it's a red herring. And I'll tell you like what I'm excited about. I think red herring is like when companies are building. I mean, every company is building AI features. So many of these AI features I feel are essentially they're automating how people use your existing product. And to me, you're not solving enterprise problems. You're not solving any problems except for that part of your existing power user who's probably already paying you. So, but I see a lot of that. It's like you can do all this with our product, and now you can do the same but faster, or maybe a little bit more. I think if you're going to go down the track of like, building AI capabilities, which I think everybody should, you really should think about like, are you leapfrogging, completely fundamentally changing workflows for companies? And there's probably an opportunity where your existing install base, your existing data that you've been silently like collecting on how people use your product actually allows you to fundamentally transform someone's workflow. Then
that's fascinating. So we've been talking about a similar concept, but we haven't connected it to PLG. The way that we think about it is that most AI applications today are where mobile apps were. Like right after the iPhone launched and the App Store launched, every mobile app was a website in a chiclet, right? It was just a reframing. It was taking what had worked on a browser and then putting it into a mobile. And then you had these mobile native experiences like Foursquare and Uber that took advantage of the capabilities of the platform and reinvented those motions or reinvented those workflows. And you're talking about exactly the same thing where you're right. It shouldn't just be a bolt-on. You can start with a new architecture. You can change the way that people work in so many different ways. And it's awesome to hear that that's actually tied to a go-to-market advantage where if you can do that effectively, you can potentially avoid this trap.
Yeah, if you can do that, then you can actually articulate a real ROI story of how you're helping companies generate more revenue, lower costs, and retain their employees.
That's it.
Everything's got to ladder up to one of those three things. Okay, lower risk, fine, 4.
Awesome. OJ, well, I think that's a great summary. I mean, I think I've learned a lot in this conversation. The 3 things that stand out for me is 1, if you're a startup leader, revenue is fuel, particularly in this environment. It sounds like Asana did that incredibly well. The second is, as you think about going from PLG to sales-led motion, it's not just about security features, it's about building that enterprise value story. And the value that an enterprise can get from software can be meaningfully larger than an individual. And the last is, if you're past the PLG trap, the most important thing that a founder can do or a management team is to start to focus, become a solution-focused or a solution-oriented product to reestablish product market fit and get that velocity going. OJ, we're thrilled to have you on Office Hours. Thank you very much for all your insights.